For the first time, we see what life looked like for the man allegedly held captive by his stepmom for 20 years. Newly released pictures show cluttered, disgusting conditions and locks on the outside of doors inside the home where a 32-year-old man who weighed 68 pounds was rescued. The woman allegedly responsible for this now pleading her innocence in court. We're on the case presented by Law and Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Before we get to today's story, I want to let you know about our new Law and Crime YouTube membership program. This is something we put together for you. If you are a true crime enthusiast, this will give you access to custom emojis, early releases on premium content, and access to members-only live streams with your favorite guests. We're going to have 3 tiers of memberships. You have the armchair detective, the amateur attorney, and the honorary judge. So if this is something you're excited about, you can go check these out right now. Click the link in the description to this video and become a Law and Crime member today. Now let's get to the latest out of Connecticut. To this point, the words of the man who's only been identified as male victim 1 or MV1 have been chilling enough. But now police are showing what he is talking about with the release of dozens of pictures. Here are just a couple of these photos from inside this home in Waterbury, Connecticut. This here is inside of MV1's room where he allegedly started the fire that led to his freedom. You can see the fire damage inside the house. And look at this. This is allegedly the door to his room. You can see here there was a lock on the outside of his room where he says he was held captive by his stepmom for 2 decades. Here is that stepmom. Her name, Kimberly Sullivan. This is from her most recent court appearance where she pleaded not guilty to charges related to the story that these newly released pictures help paint. Sullivan and MV1 lived in this house in Waterbury. On the outside, you can see it's an older home. Doesn't appear to be particularly well kept. But on the inside, these new pictures show a house that was filled with clutter. And even though the home had been damaged by smoke from this fire, there's still just a lot of mess in places like the kitchen. So let's go through these pictures that go along with a story that MB1 has told detectives. It is a story that even the most seasoned members of law enforcement say they have never seen before.
Please hurry, it's 2 Blake Street, there's a fire.
That's the voice of Kimberly Sullivan on February 17th calling 911. Inside this home, police say her stepson, who she allegedly held against his will for 20 years, had started a fire in his room. And here's another angle of that space. You can see the clutter in the room, and we also notice multiple rooms in this house with pictures of Marilyn Monroe. Male victim 1 told firefighters that he started the fire using a lighter that he took from his dad a year prior. That's a man police say was in a wheelchair, and he died in January 2024. MV1 also reportedly used hand sanitizer, which he learned was flammable, and printer paper. Police took multiple pictures of this printer inside the house. MV1 told police when the smoke started filling the room, Sullivan unlocked his door to let him out, which was bolted from the outside so he could get out. And we see pictures of locks taken by police. In court documents, MV1 says that even though Sullivan let him out, she still demanded he wash his face before firefighters arrived, afraid of what they would think of how he looked. And through these new pictures, this doesn't appear to just be a minor house fire, from the charred doorway to the smoke-damaged walls of what we believe is MV1's bedroom. This is a fire that could have been a lot worse. MV1 told police that even though he got out, Sullivan was telling him to get up and get out, but he stayed on the floor as smoke filled the room. MV1 told police that he didn't get up because he wanted to force firefighters to get him themselves, because that, he believed, was his only way out. He also told police that he started the fire because he wanted his, quote, freedom. Police say that Sullivan held her stepson captive in disturbing conditions for 20 years, allegedly since she pulled him out of public school in 2004 when he was barely a teenager. Here's the bathroom in the home. This is tough to look at, but this helps you understand what MV1 dealt with. Many of the stories that we cover here on the case prove that life is unexpected and having a great attorney matters. And that's where we bring in our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan. This is a law firm with more than 1,000 attorneys who have a history of winning. Just in the last couple of months, they were able to secure a $9.3 million verdict for a car accident in Florida, $5.6 million after a car crash in Atlanta, and $1.8 million in Kentucky. And in that case, the insurance company was only going to offer $5,000. So even if you don't think your case is worth millions of dollars, why not fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so easy to start to file a claim. You just go on your phone. You can do it in 8 easy clicks. So if you have been hurt, you want to file a claim, head over to forthepeople.com/OTC to get the process started. You can also scan the QR code on your screen right now or click the link in the description of this video. When asked about his earliest memories, MV1 said that he would sneak out of his room at night to eat and drink, and when it was discovered he was doing that, he was locked in his room. He recalled drinking from a toilet because he was only getting 2 cups of water a day. Over the years, MV1 said that he was let out less from his room, and he said that he would have to go to the bathroom in a bottle or on newspaper. There was a lot of things that stood out to me as we went through these pictures, but one part specifically was what the home's kitchen looked like. You can see here a coffee machine and a cabinet that appears to have some cans of soup, a soda bottle. It seems that it was something that Sullivan would have access to, but it's unclear just how much access MV1 had to the food. Obviously, he was 68 pounds at the time he was rescued. Other rooms in the house show items that are thrown about and a large collection of Christmas decorations still up in February when firefighters responded. Here's the body cam of when they arrived on that night, February 17th, and Sullivan was the first to meet them outside. Sullivan was arrested a short time later. After Sullivan's first court appearance, her attorney said that she was shocked to learn what her 32-year-old, 68-pound stepson was saying about living in this home. This is video per local Connecticut station WVIT-TV.
Absolutely. Yeah, so she completely maintains her innocence. From our perspective, these allegations are not true. They are outlandish. I mean, she was blown away when she heard these allegations. She's adamant they are not true. This did not happen, and we look forward to being able to vindicate her and show that she's done nothing wrong.
Sullivan's currently facing several charges, including assault in the first degree, kidnapping in the second degree, and unlawful restraint in the first degree. She was granted a $300,000 bond, which she was able to post after her first court appearance, so she's not in custody right now. The state of Connecticut then filed this motion ahead of her hearing to enter her plea on the charges to add conditions to her release, requesting house arrest and that she be monitored with a GPS tracking device. The prosecutor said he spoke with MV1 in the hospital.
This victim is afraid. This victim lives in fear. I introduced myself to the victim, explained who I was. His first question in this fear is, why is she out walking around when I was locked up in a room for 20 years? He is following this on TV and social media, so he is aware of what's happening, and I say that because it would lead to his fear. Based on all that, the state is asking for those conditions.
Sullivan stood alongside her defense attorney, who argued that nothing has changed in this case since they were last in court and bail was set, and she shouldn't be subjected to new conditions.
We're now back seeking to add additional conditions. And I understand that the whole world wants to convict Ms. Sullivan, and the whole world already has. But this is the only place, the only room in this country where we have an opportunity to protect her rights. And as unpopular as that may seem, that's what's at issue here. Her rights, no one else's. When we talk about the constitutional rights in criminal law, they're to protect the accused, regardless of how unpopular it may be. So, Your Honor, I think it would be, respectfully, Your Honor, I think it would be a mistake to add conditions at this time.
In court, we learned that Sullivan is no longer living in this house in Waterbury where the alleged abuse took place. You can see the boarded up windows, presumably from when firefighters responded on February 17th. The judge said she's now living with one of her adult daughters. The judge decided that Sullivan should be monitored by GPS but did not put her on house arrest. Sullivan's attorney told the court that she's received threats and also recently had to go to the hospital to get treatment for a mental health issue. We also have some new information about the investigation into how MV1 allegedly fell through the cracks for 20 years. We know that the Department of Children and Families visited Sullivan's house in 2005 twice after MV1 was pulled out of public school and after people at his school were then concerned about his treatment and called the state. DCF sent a social worker over, They said they didn't find anything at the time that would warrant a case, and originally said they don't have records over those visits because the state isn't required to keep documents 5 years after a case is considered unfounded. But now WFSB in Connecticut's reporting that DCF has found records related to those visits, and they tell the TV station in a statement that they're now reviewing those documents and they plan to update the public and be as transparent as they can. Sullivan had custody of MV1 with her husband since he was an infant, according to the boy's biological mom, who said she had to give him up for reasons she hasn't said publicly. The biological mom, Tracy Valorant, has now appeared at 2 of Sullivan's court hearings. Here's part of what she told the media outside the courthouse about what justice would look like in this case. This is video per WFSB TV.
That everybody that was in that household is in prison, in solitary confinement, and they could be fed 2 cups of water a day.
Sullivan's next court appearance is scheduled for April 22nd. As for the GoFundMe page that the city of Waterbury posted on its Facebook page, and at the time of this recording, it is now at more than $200,000. The point of this GoFundMe eventually will be to help MV1 as he recovers. Join us now to talk more about this case is retired FBI agent Colin Schmidt. Thanks for taking the time to be with us. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Certainly the pictures are shocking. They give a visual to what male victim 1 has described his life was like for 20 years. But for the investigators who went into this home, what would stand out to you if you were in their shoes?
Well, first thing they're going to see is basically the state of the house. You know, they got a complaint on a person or human being that was being abused. So they're going to see how bad the environment was that this person was living in. Then the next step is obviously to see if, you know, basic human needs were being met, you know, food, water, shelter, cleanliness. And obviously none of this was happening because the victim here, you know, was a full-grown adult male, but apparently only weighed 68 pounds.
It's incredible. And, you know, the bathroom stood out to me that was in very difficult shape. I recognize that there was smoke damage from the fire, but I mean, there was just clutter all over. In your career, have you ever seen, we continue to hear from law enforcement, and each person in Waterbury says that they've never seen anything like this. Have you seen anything like this story?
Well, it not like this story. I mean, I've gone into homes on search warrants where the person was either a hoarder or the house was in disarray. But the fact is that those houses, there was some purpose there. That the people were being, you know, the kids were being taken care of, so to speak. But in this case, no, I've never seen anything this crazy as far as the intense abuse that this human being was receiving from this person.
We're all trying to figure out, and certainly Kimberly Sullivan, she is innocent until proven guilty. Her attorney has said that she is shocked that she would ever be accused of a crime like this. She'll have her day in court. But what typically, at least from a hoarder's perspective, is the profile of a person who would keep a house like this?
Well, and I mean, I'm not a trained psychologist, but from basic common sense is somebody is hoarding in a house or a car is somebody that has some intense psychological dysfunction. I think many of your viewers have watched that show Hoarders to see the people, and they have a psychological connection to the items that are in their house, and they just simply can't throw anything away. And then this is amplified with the abuse that this person was receiving. And it appears that it was just basically somebody that just didn't care about another human being. Like I said, that the accused is innocent until proven guilty. And frankly, the most important witness or evidence in this case is the victim, and having a good interview of that victim to find out what really went down.
He tells, and as we've gone through the criminal complaint, talks about a life of being given a couple sandwiches a day, a couple cups of water a day. Certainly he himself is a piece of evidence because of his weight and the condition he was in when firefighters rescued him from this home. How can you, in building a case, do you take those words that he told detectives, but then at the same time now factor in these pictures that I assume that a jury will eventually see if this case does go to trial?
Well, it's kind of basic law enforcement or building any kind of case for court is you have cooperation. So if or when the victim said, "This is what occurred to me. This is what happened to me," and then they go into the house and see that the things he said have been verified, and then I'm sure they talked to her and got some sort of statement from her, and it doesn't appear that she has a lot of experience with law enforcement. So if they did have an opportunity to talk to her before she invoked her right to an attorney, I'm sure she did make some admissions that would help the case.
And one chilling image is, amongst all the clutter, but it is the locks on the outside of the door. For you, if you've ever dealt with a case of someone who's been held captive for whatever reason, I mean, how often do you see that in homes in cases like this?
Well, I have done a few kidnapping cases where basically the person was being held against their will. In those cases, it was basically psychological handcuffs, so to speak. But in this one, when you're putting locks on the outside of a door, that's demonstrating an intent to hold somebody against their will. There's no reason for that unless it's a storage closet and it's small and you're trying to keep somebody from stealing something. But in this case, there were locks on the outside of doors to bedrooms. So that demonstrates a strong intent, in my opinion, or in corroboration to what the victim was saying.
How does this home, the images you're seeing, compare to some of those kidnapping cases that you've worked?
Well, this is beyond the pale. I've never, seen anything quite as bad as this. And then you amplify it with the fact that there was a human being and they're being held against his will for apparently 20 years. It just makes the scene even that worse, or that because I'm sure that this person was living in this squalor for the entire 20 years. So it just amplifies the whole situation in as far as what was done to this victim.
It just, I keep going back to him talking about he remembered the year that it was based off of listening to NASCAR races and UConn basketball. And that just, that's something that I keep thinking about as we cover this case. So he was 32 years old. He is 32 years old. He was 68 pounds at the time of his rescue. I know you're not a doctor as well, but having worked cases of abuse, I mean, what does recovery look like for him medically to get back to a place where he could have somewhat of a life if he's being rescued at 68 pounds?
Well, just based upon my knowledge of history and what happened to the Holocaust victims, one of the most important things there is nutrition. To be very careful. Like I said, I'm not an expert in this area, but just from basic common sense. So they have to be very careful about. He has to be very careful and be under a close doctor's care, because he can't obviously eat a steak dinner or something like that, because he'd certainly get sick. So the first thing is nutrition, and then there's going to just be a very, very long path of psychological counseling to get him to a point where he's going to be able to function in society, because this is all he's known for the last 20 years. Now he's going to go and he's going to have to eventually live on his own, or live and be able to be a productive citizen in society. And there's going to need to be some training to do that.
He's made some powerful statements, not just in the criminal complaint, but the prosecutor at the last court appearance for Kimberly Sullivan. He talked about how male victim one told him he was confused as to how she's allowed out on bail when he was held in that room for 20 years. When you have interviewed victims of abuse, severe victims of abuse, like what we're seeing in this case, I mean, as an investigator, how do you go about having that conversation with someone who's been through so much?
Well, first thing is, many times the victim has undergone the Stockholm syndrome, where they don't really think they're a victim. So it's a very long process where you're going to have to basically understand that there's psychology, that this is all they've known for the last 20 years. So you're going to have to start very slow and basically get into the details. And many of the details are very, very painful for the person you're talking to. So when you do an interview with somebody like this, or a child that's been victimized, you have to demonstrate a tremendous amount of empathy and be prepared for somebody who may or may not be able to share this information, and be patient and allow them to speak. And in many ways, you end up being their therapist, as well as the person interviewing them, to pull the facts out to make the case.
What prepares you to have that type of conversation? Because I'm sure for so many people across the country, if they were to sit down with this person, they would be in tears hearing about what his life was like for 20 years as he told them that. But for you as an investigator, you have to really be in a situation where you're just trying to extract information to be able to use in a case.
Well, this is where it takes some experience with interviewing victims like this. There are people or detectives that are trained specifically with child victims who have, and this is basically what this person is. He was victimized since he was a child. And then unfortunately, you have to kind of disassociate yourself from the emotion and understand you have a job to do, and you have to get that information out to make the case in order to bring justice to the person you're talking to.
Yeah, and to think of what those conversations, as they're still ongoing, as the case is being built. He fell through the cracks in a way that I don't know if I've ever seen, where he was pulled out of school in 2004. DCF went to the house twice. They didn't feel that anything was wrong at the time. Those records have been expunged, but he was not heard from for 20 years. Even his mom, who says that she looked for him, couldn't find him. How common is it that you have, I mean, I know in these cases where DCF is overwhelmed, and there's a lot more people than we realize in the country that could fall through the cracks, but how common is it for someone to ultimately disappear like this for such a long period of time?
Well, I can't really speak on how common it is, but it's definitely in our society. It's happening because of I think the advent of social media, where people are kind of become very narcissistic and kind of into themselves. Because ultimately, as persons of society, we don't have those interactions with our neighbors anymore. We don't ask questions. I mean, we're kind of programmed not to kind of get into other people's business. And then in this case, it appears that that he just didn't have an advocate or somebody who's looking out for him to ask that probing question. DCFS went in twice. Obviously, I wasn't there, and perhaps maybe if they had asked more questions or leaned in a little bit on this, but unfortunately for them or for that community, DCFS is completely overwhelmed, and they have to get through a caseload very quickly. And many times, it's basically the so-called low-hanging fruit, the stuff that's very apparent is the stuff that they have to deal with. Something like this, it appears that the person hit it very well in terms of the abuse to the victim.
So at this point, we have male victim one, who has just an incredibly sad story to tell about what his life allegedly was like, and he'll be a key witness if this goes to trial. We certainly see the images now, and we understand that that is also a key part of this story. If you were investigating this case, you're working in Waterbury, Connecticut, who else are you talking to? What other elements are you using to build this case going forward?
Well, and there's a incentive to kind of look at this as open and shut. So the investigators certainly have to have an open mind and not only interview the victim and the assailant or the mother or the person that was holding him captive, but also interview neighbors, people around, canvass the neighborhood, anybody that may have had any interaction, because the most important thing in any of these cases is cooperation. Obviously, you have the cooperation of the squalor that he was living in, but if there was any other information, for example, her phones, if he had a device, anything that would support the case and corroborate his statements.
Yeah, it's incredible. I know that the prosecution had said that she had a friend who said she was a friend for 20 years and never heard of her talk of her stepson, but was also never allowed inside the house. So it's going to be interesting to see who else could come forward in this case. As you've looked at this, and I know we talk about kind of being a better neighbor and you know how DCF could have handled this better. When you look at this case, you try to prevent something like this from ever happening again. What else do you think about?
Well, I think it's just a matter of understanding what questions to ask in terms of DCFS, having an environment where people are see something, say something. I mean, we say that, but we have a culture, a society where snitches get stitches, so to speak. You don't want to talk and burn your neighbor or burn people around you, but people have to be kind of aware of this. And frankly, it appears that, for example, the neighbor or the friend that was never allowed in there, obviously that's going to come against or be used against the person that was holding him. But that would have been a place where she just asked a couple of probing questions. You know, maybe a neighborhood, but say, okay, why can't I come into your house? What's going on? And then if it becomes suspicious, well, then you report it to the authorities, and then hopefully they will follow up on it, do a welfare check, and find out what's going on. Because if I had gone into a house and I saw multiple doors with locks on the outside, then I would be, okay, what's going on here? We got a problem.
And then lastly, Kimberly Sullivan, she was allowed out on bond. That had a lot of people curious to upset. And then in the last court hearing, she was put on a GPS monitoring device. So she is technically free ahead of this trial. How likely is it that the authorities are following her and just continuing to watch her as she prepares for this trial, but also seeing what her life may look like?
Well, with a GPS monitoring bracelet on, it's unlikely they're physically following her. The probation office can watch her on a computer, frankly, to see where she's at. If she was able to do anything to that monitor, it pings or it goes off, and then especially with the attention this case is getting, they'd immediately go over there and try to find her. And in terms of bond, it does appear appalling that she was given bond, but basically the judge has to look for two different things. It's basically, is she a flight risk and is she a threat to the community? So if she had killed 4 or 5 people, obviously she'd be a threat to the community. The judge probably looked at this as a domestic abuse issue and just determined that, okay, that she is eligible for bond. So the fact that she's on a bracelet, she probably went back to that house. I doubt they're going and doing anything other than just following up on leads and anybody else that may have said anything about this case.
All right, retired FBI agent Colin Schmidt, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime, even for cases like this that are shocking to say the least. Thank you.
Thank you.
For On the Case presented by Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.